Hello out there. So it's November 3rd, the year 2020, and it's just been the craziest election in my life, to say the least. The craziest year of my life. And it got me thinking a lot lately about the Unabomber. And in case you don't remember who the Unabomber was, it was a man named Ted Kaczynski. And he lived during the 80s and 90s. He would send these bombs that he would make to universities and airports and to people who he deemed were important cogs in the system. So he's an interesting case because this guy, Ted Kaczynski, was actually a genius. He had an IQ of 167 and he went to Harvard. He became a professor at Berkeley. And in between the time he was at Harvard and Berkeley, he took part in these CIA MKUltra mind control experiments where they were experimenting with different interrogation methods and how to extract the truth from people. So most of the experiments that he was in involved humiliation, breaking him down, finding out what his weaknesses were, and then digging into those weaknesses and breaking him down, just trying to humiliate the shit out of him. So he could have left these studies at any time, but he chose to stay in these studies because, in his words, he wanted to let them know that they could not break him. He had a huge grudge against what he called the system, and he did not want the system to know that they could break him. So what is the system that he talks about? It's technology, but it's not any individual technology like this microphone or this computer. He was talking about the system that technology created. He was very against this because he believed it was a form of prison. And the interesting thing about his case is he wrote a manifesto about all his beliefs and why he's sending these bombs and what he thinks of the system. And philosophers and scholars from all around the world, from prestigious universities, have analyzed his manifesto, and not a single one of them could find a real issue with any of his logic. Most of the logic was pretty sound, which is interesting because whether you agree or disagree with his behavior, his extreme behavior, here's another thing I just want to mention before I continue, is because I brought up the CIA mind control experiments. It's natural for most people to look at a person like Ted Kaczynski who has this extreme behavior, and it's natural for people to look for an event in his personal life to pin the cause of his behavior on. And so people have actually selected those CIA mind control experiments as a possible cause for his behavior. Others have pointed out that he was sent to a hospital where he was isolated from his family and parents for a pretty long period of time, and he was never the same after that. So he has this intense case of abandonment. There's all these theories about why did he do what he did? And we probably will never know, or maybe we will, but for now we don't know. But what we do know is his manifesto. And his manifesto has very important implications. And I've read the whole thing, and it is a pretty interesting manifesto. It's not anything new. Most of the ideas in his manifesto have been around for a while. A lot of different just some libertarian stuff in there, and you can find he attacks leftists in there, but he also attacks conservatives. So technology is outside of politics in his view, and that is really what he saw as the problem, was the way that technology was being used. So let's talk a little bit about his manifesto, because it has some interesting points, and just because my heart goes out to the victims' families, but he is bringing up some really important implications, and we're seeing this happening all around us right now with what technology is doing. So I'm not saying let's take down the system. He also thought that the only solution to fix the system was to destroy it. He said it was past the point of no return, and the only way to amend it is to tear it down. So trust me, I don't believe in that, but I do think we need to care about how we use our technology. and we have to exercise clemency and some valor and some judiciousness with how we develop technologies and how we use it. So he points out that this system that technology has created is a prison, and our bodies, our physical human bodies, which is what we are, has not evolved to catch up with this type of system. So we're still living in hunter-gatherer bodies, and he believes that's actually the way to go because it's the most sustainable. And he wanted to return things to this type of living, to this living off the land in these hunter-gatherer small communities. This is what he wanted, with no system. And so I'll talk about a few things that stood out in his manifesto to me. One of the things is what he calls the power process. And the power process is different than one's drive for power. You can also equate power. This is my own interpretation of it. So I see how he looks at power. You can kind of equate that to energy as well. So yes, there is a drive that people want power in the world, but you also need power biologically. You need energy to survive and to continue living, which is a form of power. Energy is power. So he said that ideally we have evolved to spend most of our lives just simply fulfilling our biological needs: food and shelter, sex, and bonding. And most of our lives is supposed to just consist of that. But because technology has satisfied getting those things so easily, we don't even have to think about that. Apart from, yes, you got to work a job, but it doesn't require much effort to work a menial job and to just live and buy food at the grocery store. Anybody can do that. So there's not a lot of spirit, or you don't really have to exert yourself with all your effort to do that. Maybe some people do, but for just in general, it's not the same as if you had to hunt for each meal and you had to fish and you didn't know where your next meal is going to come from unless you were successful at catching it. So there's a huge difference between what I'm talking about, between working and then buying food at the grocery store and hunting for your food. So basically, because we have our biological needs satisfied so easily, we have all this excess time in our lives left. And if you don't do something with that time, it's going to cause depression, anxiety, and demoralization. And he gives an example in the manifesto where he says, imagine that you were like a genie and you can have any wish that you wish for. Any wish that you have will be granted to you. He says for a short period of time, that would be enjoyable. It would be amusing. But after not that long, you would actually get extremely bored, demoralized, and depressed, because our minds and bodies are not supposed to live like that. So what he said was, this is why people choose surrogate activity. That's why people who have surrogate activities, this is what he called surrogate activities. A surrogate activity is, you could say it's like a hobby or a passion or a life purpose. It's a life purpose, a career. It's something that you're devoting your life to. And if you don't have a good surrogate activity, then you're going to be prone to all those psychological disorders, like I just mentioned, the depression, anxiety, demoralization. And in order to have a healthy surrogate activity, it can't just be anything. This activity has to require your maximum effort, and you have to have a relatively good success rate. If you have goals, or your life purpose is way too grand and way too hard to fulfill, so you don't have a good success rate, then it's not going to fulfill this power process. So you need to have a surrogate activity that fits this bill, that requires maximum effort, and you have a relatively good success rate at. And so he talks about different world leaders and how some of them, because they've risen to power, so now that they're the most powerful person in the world, there's not much, they can have anything they want. They have money, they have the sex. They have it all. They have power over others. So what next? The ones who don't move on to something else, who don't form another purpose, or he gives the example of the Emperor Hirohito, how he, of Japan during World War II, he got interested in marine biology, and then he won a Nobel Prize or something for discovering like a new species of sea animal in the abyss, or something like that. But so he talks about you need to have, or you'll see other world leaders will be real interested in hunting or dog raising or something, just whatever. They have these goals. They have these other surrogate activities and goals that they get interested in. But if they don't have a surrogate activity, they suffer and they break down and they self-destruct. So he believes our bodies have not caught up with this system that we're living in. And it messes up the power process. And he says the power process is a biological need, just as much as food, just as much as shelter. You need to fulfill this power process, or else you will suffer these psychological disorders. And so it's interesting because what he did was he saved up whatever money he had and he moved into the wilderness of Montana. He left civilization, he left the system altogether, and he lived in a little shack. And it was there that he would build bombs and then send them through the mail. And he would send them to, like I said, airports, universities. That's why Unabombers, universities and airports. And he'd send them to oil executives, people like that. Or technology people too, like computer shop owners or computer programmers. Anybody who was a big deal in the tech or government, he would send a bomb to. And he would get better and better with each bomb. This was something that evolved over time, all through the 80s and into the 90s. And then he was finally caught because his brother turned him in. But he talks about how if he didn't leave all these clues, no one would have ever been able to catch him, because he says if you just exercise a little bit of common sense, the chances of you getting caught is actually zero. And he wasn't caught for a really long time because no one can see him making these things. He's out in the wilderness. He has no identity. No one knows who he is. So the Unabomber Manifesto. But why am I bringing this up? Because I think that this is actually happening right now. If you look at technology, what it's doing, we got to start thinking about how the direction that this is taking. But another interesting thing about language is people would look at him and say he's insane, but he would look at people like, I guess, people who are living in the system, and he would say that they're insane because they're inside the system. So they are inside sanity, the system, and he's outside of it, so he's actually the sane one. This would be from his perspective. And maybe he's right. I don't know. I don't think it's right what he did. But, I mean, governments have killed hundreds of people too. So it's interesting. It's just a different justification. He has a justification for doing it also. But, yeah, he would write the initials FC on his bombs. He didn't do this the whole entire time. He started doing this towards the end. But he would write FC, these initials, on each bomb, and it stood for Freedom Club. And that was what he was trying to establish, was freedom. He was trying to free the world, free the human race by bringing us all back to the hunter-gatherer societies. And yeah, he talks a lot more about society and the system in the manifesto, where he says, if you look at how the system has grown to power, it has to first break down small groups. And there's all kinds of different small groups. There's families. You have individual families, you have gangs, you have militias, you have religions, and you have all these little groups. And some of them are dangerous. Some of them we think are dangerous, or some of them are labeled as dangerous. And he says they're mostly dangerous, not because they're inherently dangerous to you or I, but they're dangerous because they're dangerous. They can't be controlled by the system. So they're dangerous to the system. So therefore, if they're dangerous to the system, they are dangerous to us too, who live in the system. And so this where are we going with technology right now in this day and age, and with everything that's going on right now. I think this is why it reminded me, is because there's talk of a civil war that's about to take place right now because of this division that we're having in the country. And it just reminded me of this, is that for a really long period of history in America, there's been a lot of uprisings against the government and militia movements and things. So maybe that's why it jogged my memory of the Unabomber and I started researching him. But it was a good thing I did, because I actually think that his manifesto, we got to look at this stuff. So yeah, so that was the Unabomber, and definitely check out that manifesto if you get a chance.